I'm Todd, and I'm on the Better Spaces team. Hello, Gina. Hello, AG. Better Spaces partners with buildings and companies to help you connect and create and perform at your highest potential. And we want you to have a better workday. Today, we're learning how companies and businesses can take a more intersectional approach to inclusion. We have Mim Simph from Global Women for Wellbeing, and Jennifer Ingram from Calibrated Lens. And you will get action steps businesses can take to help make the workplace a better place for everyone. This conversation is brought to you in partnership with Global Women for Wellbeing, which is MEM's company, and it's a diverse group of dedicated professionals, community leaders, researchers, students, and entrepreneurs that are connecting to create positive change by empowering more healthy female leadership at all levels for a more sustainable world. Jennifer is our guest today, and Jennifer is the founder and CEO of Calibrated Lens, LLC. Living and leading by example, Jennifer Ingram's career has been forged through her greatest passions, inspiring others to embrace their journey, live their truth, and thrive authentically while promoting a unified vision for more equitable and inclusive communities. A student of life and a continuous learner, Jennifer has traveled the globe, visiting 6 continents, wow, and over 30 countries. She approaches differences with curiosity and humility, seeking to understand how others experience life, foster a sense of belonging, and practice inclusion. She was the Diversity and Inclusion Program Director for the Mayo Clinic, VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for United Way, Greater Cincinnati, and GW4W board member. That's a very impressive background, Jennifer. Jennifer and Mem are talking today about creating community in the workplace, DE&I, and racial equity. We're extremely honored to have this important conversation. Please feel free to chat with us at any questions that you have. Mim, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Todd. As always, we so appreciate this partnership and being able to talk about such diverse and important conversations. And this one is very near and dear to the GW4W's mission. Last week, this is kind of part 2. We talked a little bit more from an individual perspective, but today is really focused on what we can do in our organizations. And with that, we know that this is not a new conversation. And unfortunately, not as many companies has made the kind of progress that we would like to see, even though there have been initiatives and conversations and programs. So thought we would start out just talking a little bit about, what are some of the things that really haven't worked, that haven't gotten us further faster?
Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Todd. Mem, I appreciate the question. That's I think $1 million question that has propelled a multi-billion dollar industry. I want to start there by highlighting the financial contributions that have been made to address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what I would frame as a long journey or a continuum. Right. And so some of the things that we know now that we didn't know 30 years ago is that a compliance or regulatory approach in isolation doesn't necessarily result in culture change. Right. I would also add that siloed efforts that reinforce a programmatic approach don't work in isolation. And so you can put on events, you can have talks, but in isolation, those things really do fall short of bringing about the desired impacts of long-term sustainable culture change, and beyond the culture change, ensuring that there is diverse representation within an organization. And so those, I would say, are the 2 things that really have not worked, and we know that they haven't worked. I oftentimes like to talk about the training or programmatic element in terms of attrition, right? And so many organizations tout that, you know, they're excited that they have 100% of their workforce that has been trained in unconscious bias. But an average organization has anywhere from 2 to 8% of attrition per year. Right. And so over the course of 2 years, and we're on the low end of that spectrum, right, you might see 16% of your workforce that was trained leave out of the organization. Added the new folks that are coming into the organization that bring their own views and experiences of culture that really could be incongruent with the organization and who they hope or aspire to be. And so those are a couple of things that, you know, I would highlight that we've tried, and, you know, we've definitely, you know, put a lot of emphasis and effort as well as financial resources behind that just really haven't hit the mark on ensuring sustainable transformation and work in this space.
Yeah, it's so well put. There's the phrase that's sometimes accredited to Peter Drucker about, yeah, culture eating policy for breakfast. And I always add, yeah, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So, you know, really important, I think, particularly moving forward with this discussion. So what can companies do to look at this in a different way? And how can they gain a better understanding of kind of where they are and where the next step should be?
Absolutely. There are several things that can be done. I'm a firm believer of applying a change management methodology to this work. And as a part of doing that, using the ADKAR model, creating a sense of awareness is where we've oftentimes stopped. Looking at desire and the knowledge to support the change or transformation are two critically important elements that are required, in my opinion, to be able to move the needle. I would also add defining your current state. Right, and understanding the point by which you are starting from beyond facts and figures, but taking many of those anecdotal accounts that have been shared and communicated and allowing that to feed in and inform where you have gaps in your operations, right? And so it's really lifting up the hood beyond awareness building and looking at the inner workings and the components that make up not only your human capital functions, but your organization at large. And so the second thing that I'll highlight is looking at how you can take a holistic, integrated approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, looking at your various functional areas. And so a couple of areas that I love to talk about that folks oftentimes don't draw the initial connection. The HR space or human capital space is kind of that first landing.
Dr. Sorry about that.
It's fine. A human capital space is really that first landing point, but looking at finance and operations, looking at beyond the finance and operations avenue, if you have an acquisition arm, right? And how are you bringing folks to the table to engage in applying a lens of DEI proactively versus reactively? And I'll give you some examples of how that is oftentimes, you know, evident, right? Many organizations that are more forward thinking have advisory committees or DEI committees that provide feedback and input on various initiatives. And so if you are coming with a fully baked plan, and this is the last stop before you go to production, you can imagine that's a very different conversation than if you were to engage on the front end to better understand where the gaps and opportunities and what are the potential unintended consequences of decisions that are made from folks from a diverse group or identity or lived experience to give you that feedback from the onset. And so those are a couple of ways that, you know, organizations, you know, can really look at incorporating this work in a more holistic manner.
Is there a specific methodology that you can recommend about choosing people to be on that committee? Because I think sometimes when we talk about these things, oh, great, but sometimes there's some real barriers around how to get truly diverse feedback so that you can be culturally specific to the organization. So how would you go about choosing people for this committee?
That's a great question, ma'am. And I want to start by highlighting, the differences between an advisory group and your diversity committee. These are two different bodies. So I'll first start with the group that is most common or prevalent within organizations, which is your diversity and inclusion committee. What I have found in my experience working with organizations, the diversity and inclusion committees are not set up for success. I'll share that by kind of going through a particular list of various components that should be foundational for those groups to be successful, including what recruitment looks like for those groups. So first and foremost, how and who is invited to join that group? Is there an application process? If so, are you transparently sharing the ways in which you'll make those decisions? The second tier down from that is, what are the term limits, right? And what are the spaces or gaps, be it functional areas that may or may not be represented, be it lived experience and individual identities, be it level within the organization, right? I love going into teams and they come in, they're like, oh, Jen, we've already got a diversity and inclusion committee. I said, oh, wonderful. I'd love to meet with them. And most of those folks are entry-level staff, right? That don't sit at the executive team level. There is no connection to the organization strategy. So, as much as we want to look at individual identity as a first indicator or marker of having a committee that's representative of your organization, also looking at the level of the folks that are on that group. And also realizing that many people from marginalized communities are overtaxed. There was a wonderful article that came out a few weeks ago that talked about the emotional tax that people of color and folks from other marginalized identities are experiencing by being tapped to engage in conversation, to lead these efforts. They're subject matter experts like myself and countless others that are skilled and understand how to actually do this work. Realize that just because someone may come from a marginalized identity, they can't effectively produce your desired outcome. So I think that's always very important to highlight, especially when teams are looking to make sustainable progress. A couple of other things that align with the committee and could also be reflective of the advisory groups, right? Having a very clear purpose for this group and ensuring that there's a sense of accountability, right? Who is this group accountable to? Is it accountable to the organization, to all staff, to your stakeholders at large? And if so, how are they soliciting feedback from all of those groups and engaging and ensuring that there's a clear line of communication that's present across all of those entities to continue to maintain a sense of connection to this work? Mem, to your earlier question, getting to a space where this work is co-owned by everyone, realizing that it's not one individual that might have a title, it's not just the members of your committee or advisory groups. This is work that should be co-owned by everyone, and especially people that are not from marginalized communities, and understanding the role in creating a sense of understanding and awareness of the responsibility of folks that are from dominant groups, and also carrying this work forward and operationalizing this work.
It's such great information. And again, to kind of underscore that, do you have a strategy? Is there an actual project plan, just like you do for anything else? And do you have people on there that can actually have voice enough to drive some of this? And, again, I know with our discussions over the past, 14, 16 months, this idea about not overtaxing certain people in your organization that may have a good voice or do that, but this just having that awareness of the exhaustion level for certain people and making sure that you have the right people coming in. I also love term limits, because any committee, whether it's gender equity, whether it is health and well-being, these are just the best rules to follow for any of those types of committees. Or even incorporating it into safety committees. If you're in a manufacturing environment, there's an opportunity to do those kinds of things too. So, that also leads us to, okay, so are there companies that are doing it right? And if so, what's made them, beyond what we just discussed, more successful from your perspective?
Absolutely, and we really did get down into some of the nuances of this work, but I think it's important to get to that space. But to your question, there are absolutely organizations that are doing great work, right? But I would say that in most folks in this space would say that good work isn't enough, right? Or we have not yet seen an organization that I would hold up as a gold star. I would say that there are many organizations that have the commitment, that have the resource allocation, that have the expertise and the skill set in-house that are actively doing really great work. So what I would say is, engaging in external benchmarking is one way to begin to assess and analyze how an organization is doing in this work. There are a few that I would highlight. One, and it's interesting because they have benchmarks in different areas. So at large, Diversity Inc. is kind of the gold standard in external benchmarking. And so each year they put out a top 50 list, and then they actually do an industry specific breakout. And so I oftentimes, when I'm mentoring or coaching folks that are asking, well, Jen, how do I know if it's an inclusive organization? Step one, have they engaged in external benchmarking? And if so, how are they ranking against their peers in other institutions? HRC, the Human Rights Coalition, they have a great benchmarking resource called the Corporate Equality Index, or if you're in healthcare, the HEI, Health Equality Index. And so seeing where your organization ranked as it relates to LGBT plus inclusion. And so again, assessing the HRC, their leaders list is kind of how they refer to organizations that engage in that work and have gone through the assessment and actually ranked. Another is the Disability Equality Index, right? So there are all of these indexes and assessments that many organizations, take the time. And this is, I've led this work within, large organizations. It is labor intensive. It is, quite immersive. That takes multiple months and many stakeholders to actually complete these assessments. But those are a few that I would highlight as both those organizations that have ranked. Additionally, the process that goes into completing the benchmarking. But I would say that any organization that you may enter, it will take time for you to truly uncover for yourself if it is an inclusive environment, right? These are, assessments that are done at a macro level. And so the micro climates that are present on different teams and at different levels of the organization really are, dictated and determined by leaders. Right. And the leaders of those functional areas, and then going up a tier, how those leaders are held accountable for creating equitable and inclusive spaces for folks. It may not be the most popular practice, but really getting to a point where you are aligning executive level compensation with DEI metrics. Right? What gets measured gets done. And, time and time again, we see the bottom line reinforced as a driving force behind, how successful some organizations are in advancing this work. And there's, of course, the moral imperative, but as it relates to creating cultures of accountability, I think that is definitely something that more teams and organizations are putting on the table and considering, especially as, to your point, when we initially started this conversation, this isn't a new conversation, right? There have been billions of dollars aligned with training and activities and, right? But moving beyond those things to start looking at accountability structures is, I think, definitely something of the future.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I know, and I don't know that it's whether or not it's been released yet, but from an investor perspective, if you're publicly traded now, there's just like environmental sustainability, there is now, Bloomberg is working on or is about to release, if they haven't already done it, they're going to start looking at companies through this lens. And so you're 100% right. Like, we need to be able to measure. I just want to mention, just from the GW4W perspective, Nest UK, which is a big pension fund out of London, and you can publicly go out and they publicly put out how they're measuring things. It's a great resource. We gave them an award because they measured it, they moved it, and they publicly went out and published about this. And then also the breakers in Palm Beach, two completely different industries. One's finance, one's hospitality. So it really isn't about the industry that you're in, but so much about what you're measuring, how you're setting this up, and the kind of transparent conversations you're really having about where we want to go. So leaders that are interested in this, what are some of the ways that they can help as they start to develop this stuff to have more transparent conversation? And how do we build real meaningful allyships? So not just these official committees, but allyships like throughout the organization that can potentially help drive this forward.
Yeah, and ma'am, you hit the nail on the head. It's moving beyond these committees that are tasked with doing this work and getting into the mainstream of this being co-owned by everyone. And leaders set the tone. Leaders set the tone by way of, what things are viewed as appropriate, acceptable, and unacceptable. And so the first point that I would start with is really looking at creating a culture where folks are active upstanders versus passive bystanders, right? Mm-hmm. When there are things that occur, how are leaders responding in the moment, and then following up to ensure that they are understanding of what it means to create a culture of psychological safety at a team level. The greatest kind of friction, you've got the top and the bottom, where oftentimes you see the grassroots efforts popping up, and then you see the top-down approach with executive leaders wanting to advance this work. But it's the fuzzy middle that really is the sticking point. And so the more that you can have mid-level managers, directors operating with a shared understanding of what it means to practice behaviors that are aligned with, environments of high trust, and get down to the individual level of understanding, how do you establish trust with me? How do you establish trust among team members, and creating a sense of psychological safety within that process. And then as it relates to allyship, I think that we have normalized the term ally, and this is just my own kind of sticking point for being in relationship with someone from a marginalized community. And what I'm really, pressing and pushing for is to activate that. Right? What are the behaviors that you are displaying that reinforce your allyship, but also realizing that allyship is a continuum. So at Calibrated Lens, we've actually created a continuum of allyship, starting with, again, being a passive bystander and moving all the way up to standing in solidarity, and realize that it's not a static space or position, but it's one that you should continue to challenge yourself around to work up towards standing in solidarity, not viewing the experiences or issues that folks from marginalized communities are experiencing as separate from your own, but instead as issues that are also, impacting individuals that may not be from those marginalized communities and causing harm for both parties. And really taking on a sense of both not only verbally expressing support, but displaying that in your actions with consistency. So those are a few of the thoughts that I have regarding both leadership and then also allyship.
Yeah, and I think for us too, we know we talk about this a lot, is grace around leadership. It's so important that this is built into leadership training. We all come from our own experiences. And so I think it gets to some of the nuanced, why you need coaches, why you need people to come in and listen to conversation, to take some of the emotion and politics out of it. Because often someone will try to be an ally or try to do something with the best of intention, but it may come out the wrong way. And so starting out these programs, the minute you shut somebody down who is trying to start to do the right thing and not really understanding how to cultivate those things within your organization, can really backfire. Yay, we have this committee, yay, we're doing these things, but we really haven't taught our team leaders how to really think about this or give them the opportunity to explore their own questions before they go out and lead their own teams. So just such incredible advice around where we want to go. And now is, we keep saying this, but truly we are coming out of this pandemic. We are, hopefully, I know not everywhere in the world is doing really well right now, but in general, there is much more hope than there was 6 months ago. And for leaders to be able to start to use this platform coming back to work to reimagine where we can go, to figure out how we can really start to understand and respect diversity so that we can have intentional inclusion, just means for a much healthier workplace for everyone. It can reduce turnover numbers. It can create better innovation within your organization. And it can attract and retain talent, because we all know, if anybody's watching the news right now, war for talent is getting worse and worse and worse. And so there are going to be very specific things, particularly for people that may have felt marginalized in other organizations, that they're going to be looking for. And so this is not just about, how do we do the right moral thing, as you pointed out, Jen, but what an opportunity for organizations to say, we're going to start to figure out where we are and move this forward and give ourselves a competitive edge. We always talk about health and well-being and healthy workplace, but truly, if we should all understand how important that's going to be, over the next couple of years, from a mental, physical inclusion perspective. And just so appreciate your words of wisdom, Jen, and your expertise that you bring to the table around this, and for all the work that Better Spaces is doing, and how this integrated approach about purpose, place, people, super opportunity for sustainable and really successful businesses moving forward.
Absolutely.
So yeah, if there are any questions, and Jen, just if people want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Sure. So www.calibratedlens.com is our website. You can also follow me personally on LinkedIn. I haven't been quite as active, but I normally share quite a few articles and things of that nature. And I give a lot of talks. This is Pride Month. I think I'm up to 12 conversations that I'll be engaging in or facilitating in some degree throughout the course of the month of June. So looking forward to hopefully seeing some of you there. And the last thing that I'll just end with is, Mem, you are absolutely right. We're coming out of a pandemic, but we also are still engaged in a lot of social unrest regarding inequality, right? And we have not yet gone through that. We are still actively, wrestling with those things. And so leadership at large will require new competencies, and for leaders to have a new and a different lens that is both aware of differences, but also the understanding of how to engage across differences effectively and with agility. And so, I think that increasingly so, we're going to have to see leaders that are being retooled, retrained, and held accountable for new expectations moving forward.